Our top focus at this hour, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service has dismissed growing concerns and Western concerns at that Moscow is planning to invade Ukraine. In a rare statement, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service said that the Americans are painting a frightening picture of Russian tanks that will start crushing Ukrainian cities, and that the United States was scaring the global community. It also added that the US was sending its allies false information on the concentration of forces for the military invasion of Ukraine. This denial comes after Western countries raised an alarm over increased Russian military activity near Ukraine. The Kremlin has accused the West of leading an information campaign in order to escalate tensions in the region, and that it was alarmed by a US-backed push to supply weapons to Ukraine.
What is happening now in the world's diplomacy had never happened before. That's why there's been a lot of slyness, desperate to explain something, and against the backdrop of public accusation of Moscow inaction, such a stunning step has been made. Yes, it's unconventional for diplomacy, but from the other side, such unconventionally sly situation requires unconventionally decisive actions. Ukraine likely pursued military solution of their problem to create one more disaster for themselves and everyone in Europe. This is what Ukraine tends to achieve, and it is trying to achieve it under the shelter of NATO exercise. NATO ship in the Black Sea, British soldiers in the region with numbers increasing. That is what Ukraine wants to achieve, and this is of course heartbreaking because this will entail serious consequences.
President Putin brought up the issue on a call with Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi, accusing Ukraine of escalating the issue. According to a Kremlin transcript, Putin discussed provocative steps taken by Ukraine in aggravating the situation on its eastern border. This after Ukraine used Turkish-made drones against pro-Moscow rebels. Putin has also voiced concerns about the rising US presence in the Black Sea. Last week, Putin said that the West was escalating the conflict by holding drills in the Black Sea, and said that the US flew bombers near Russia's borders. In the meantime, Ukraine is on high alert. Its airborne troops conducted drills near the capital, Kiev. The drills simulated the landing of troops in armored personnel carriers for an attack on an enemy target. Ukraine has been locked in an ongoing conflict with pro-Russia separatists in regions bordering Russia since the year 2014, after Moscow annexed Crimea. Kiev and its Western allies accuse Russia of sending troops and arms across the border to support the separatists, a claim that Moscow denies. And for more on this story, our correspondent Stewart Smith is now joining us live from Moscow. Stewart, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to WION. Now, what can you tell us about Russia denying claims of invading Ukraine despite the troop buildup that has now raised international alarm? Even Germany has recently called the buildup worrying.
Yes, it is worrying a lot of European leaders, and many of them are calling Russian President Vladimir Putin to express their concern. The spokesperson of the Russian president, Dmitry Peskov, says that any troop movement within the border of Russia does not pose a threat to anyone and should not cause concern to anyone. There's no doubt there are troop movements, military equipment being moved around Russia from the east, from the central part of Russia to the west, near Ukraine. That's clear from satellite imagery and defense observers. The dispute, the discussion, is whether this is another movement of forces, as we saw earlier in this year in spring, which ultimately led to no action, or is it the forces amassing ahead of any potential invasion? Russia says that if it is moving troops around, then it's in response to concerns that Ukraine could take the initiative to try and solve the violent clashes on its eastern border with Russia using military force. These pro-separatist movements, pro-Moscow rebels in the east of Ukraine are in a constant war with the Ukraine military, and Ukraine believes they're funded and supplied equipment by Russia. Russia says it's worried now that Ukraine, with the military assistance, military advice coming from NATO countries, could take the initiative and try and solve that through using violence.
Right. Now, Stuart, how is Ukraine responding to all this? Will we see an escalation in the crisis, especially due to the involvement of the West, particularly America?
Well, that's what Russia worries about exactly. I mean, the United States are sending or have already sent 80 tons of ammunition to Ukraine. It's promised more, millions of dollars more worth of help. The Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson of the Russian president, says NATO advisors and equipment are now in Ukraine. There are drills being taken place with ships in the Black Sea. American bombers are flying near the Russian border. The problem, and what makes this conflict so hard to analyse objectively, is all of these activities, one side, such as Ukraine, says is in response to the Russian troop movements. Russia says it's moving its troops because it's worried about what Ukraine might do. And throughout all of this, Russia says there is an information campaign going on at the Ukrainian side to present Russia as a threat, but Russia insists it is not a threat. Ukraine is worried, very worried, that Russia may take the initiative to invade further into the country. The Crimea has already been annexed by Russia since 2014, and Ukraine believes Russia is propping up the rebels in the east of the country, which is why it's so grateful for NATO support. But in receiving that support, it worries Moscow about whether Ukraine could take the initiative.
Right, Stuart, just staying away from the story and moving on to another crisis in the neighbourhood. Russia has also been accused of playing a part in the migrant crisis along the EU border by supporting the Lukashenko regime. How is all this playing out in Moscow as of now?
That's right. Well, Moscow denies it has anything to do with the migrant crisis in Belarus, although it has spoken to the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, to try to, what it says, calm things down. The latest we're hearing on the border is that it's now in a very steady situation. Belarus has provided accommodation and shelter to around 2,000 migrants in the capital city of Minsk, and people staying there are able to get food, water, warmth, which deals with the direct humanitarian issue which European leaders were so worried about. But there are still thousands of migrants in Belarus looking to get to countries such as Germany, through Poland, through Lithuania, through Latvia, all of those countries surrounding Belarus. We know that a few attempts are made each day, but it's nothing like what we saw last week. And so for now, the default state of things seems to be a few attempts each day, but no sort of big problem for the Polish border security forces as we saw last week.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.